to. All right, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. Please forgive my ghost-like appearance. I kind of dig it. It's just the smiling. So, so glad to be here with you today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Candy, for having me. Oh, how I wish I were in Georgia with you. Currently, I'm in Houston, Texas, which is my home. It's where I was born. But I'm currently living in New York City, and that's where, I call home. That's my new home. And I moved to New York about 6 years ago from Texas. And that's when I was faced with a dilemma. I am an attorney by training. I started my career in legal as a paralegal right out of college, excuse me. And I quickly discovered that there was a disconnect between what I was doing for work as a corporate attorney and what I was experiencing, which is education. And the move to New York was in an effort to pursue a career in education, which I did so successfully, secured a tenure track position at a college right outside of New York City. And that's kind of where this speaking and teaching kind of came from. But the issue was that I am licensed in the state of Texas, but I was living in New York. And so I instantly had to figure out, well, how can I move my practice to New York City and still be able to sustain myself? And very, very grateful for that transition, because now that we're in a situation with COVID-19 where many of us are working from home, I was able to help some of my colleagues to transition their practices to be able to work remotely. And I have done this for clients, many clients over the last 10 years. Without realizing why I had this push towards digital and towards paperless offices and towards making sure that people were able to operate their businesses anywhere from any location. I feel like this is a sustainability issue. I always have. I was a paralegal for huge law firms back in 1999 before the Y2K scare. And so part of my job was to help to position the very large law firm that I was working at to be able to survive that crisis. Now we're glad, it turned out nothing really happened, right? But the firm that I was working for had the foresight to do some things digitally to try and ramp up. And it was my job to do that for them. And that's where I developed this specialty for creating remote businesses, digital enterprises, paperless offices, and sustainable practices. So I'm just really glad to be here with you all because I love teaching, but I'm also really passionate about the law. And so just to keep us on task, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please feel free to answer questions as they come up. Candy's going to monitor the chat box for me, and we'll make sure we get all your questions answered. We have plenty of time, and we have a small group, so I'm actually really grateful for that. So just real quick, let me pull up my screen. Okay. Can you all see that? Okay.
Yes, we can see it. You may want to go into presentation mode.
Right.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay. All right. So just 3 objectives for today. We're going to, by the end of this, and well, first, let me start by saying this. I'm not making any promises today. I am not here as your attorney. I'm giving you some advice and counsel, but I'm not sharing legal advice. This is difficult because we're all over the place. And so I'm trying to present the law generally, which is mostly American federal law, right? And to the extent that it's applicable to the states, I'll make sure to clarify that for you. But I want to make it clear that in the US, things are very localized, and I'll explain that a little bit better. so you can kind of get what I mean. So we're not, we're not going to get too into the weeds, but if you have specific questions, let me know. LaShonda, do you mind putting in the chat box, what state are you in? I know where Onika's in New York. Sam is international. We have some new, if you could just put really quickly in the chat box where you're going to be operating, just so it gives me a little bit of clarity, that would help, because I don't want to go too into something that's not relevant. All right, so we'll start by looking at a little bit about business entities, then we'll look at contracts, we'll talk about IP, and then we'll answer any questions. So there is a PDF, let me share that with you. Okay, and you can use this as a handout if you like. You can pull it up right now, or you can pull it up later, whatever works best for you. And it's just for note-taking purposes. We're going to do a little bit of an exercise to start. You should be able to get the PDF I just sent. And we're starting with our just a mission. Now, what I believe is that there's 3 things you have to look at when you're creating a business. And it's the internal, it's the external, and it's the eternal. Internal, external, eternal. So we'll start with the internal, because one of the keys to sustainability in business, in my opinion, is for you to understand who you are, why you're here, what you're doing. Okay, so if you can see at the bottom of this slide is my current mission statement. Now, of course, this is going to evolve, but I've created what I consider to be it's like math with words, right? How to write a mission statement. So you'll see the first thing there on the handout is you're going to take an action verb, you're going to add to that your target audience, and then you'll end with what I call tags, which are talents, abilities, gifts, and skills. Okay, so you can see that mine here is to empower, which is my action verb, entrepreneurs, which is my target audience, to do what? To live better, right? Kind of general, live better, through my tags, talents, gifts, and abilities, education, advocacy, and philanthropy. All right. So even if you have a sheet of paper there, if you could just take a minute to try and jot out for yourself your mission statement. I hope you already have this or something similar. And if you want to share it in the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand and share it with us, I was going to do breakout groups, but since the group is small, if you don't mind sharing, we're happy to hear from you. If you want to keep it to yourself, I understand. But if anyone wants to share, you are welcome. So what we're doing right now is we are using the handout that I just added for you in the chat box. You can download that. And then we're writing in the first section there our mission statement, which is an action verb plus the target audience, an expected outcome, and our talents, gifts, and abilities, tags. I'll give you just a couple minutes, and if anybody, just one person would like to share, I'd love to hear them. Or even if you put it in the chat, I'll read it for you. All right, Sam, no problem. I know some of us are really thinking about the nuts and bolts of how to do this, and we'll definitely get to that. But it's my understanding that a business is not sustainable unless it comes from the inside. Excellent, Candy. So is this for you personally or for the organization? I think it's for the organization, right?
Yes, this is for the organization.
Okay, you want to read that for us?
Our mission is to provide professional class lodging and programming for the nomadic professional that facilitates personal and professional relationships, collaboration, and success.
I love that. And no wonder you attracted me, because I am a nomadic professional that enjoys relationships, collaboration, and success.
Oh, you
So
are
you are
right.
attracting.
I'm attracting the right customers then, or the
Yes,
right.
and that's what the mission will do, right? If any of you are familiar with the law of attraction, when you set your intention clearly, you begin to attract the right customers. And so we want to make sure we're clear on that. Does anybody need any help? If you need extra time, let me know in the chat. We're going to move on. Yes, Miriam, we will get to that. Of course, we all want to get paid.
Hello.
Hi, Miriam.
Thank you very much for this. I joined now later a bit, but I would like to ask, can you please help me to understand what now is going here and what I have to do?
Okay, sure. So we are currently working on our mission statements. If you can see my screen, I've given you a formula for writing out your mission statement. And in the chat, if you'll just scroll up just a little bit, we have a PDF that I shared. I can share it again.
But you
That
see,
we
I'm
are
not able to
using.
see PDF because I joined
Okay.
now 5 minutes
Okay.
ago.
Okay, sure. I went ahead and posted it again for you. But it's the same thing that's on the screen. Right now, we're working on our mission statements. We're talking about the internal things that you need to clarify before you can create a business that's going to get you paid. All right, so being clear on our mission. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And I have to write here in the chat,
All
yeah,
right.
about.
Okay, yeah. And we're going to take the questions at a designated time. You should be able to get the PDF right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I got this PDF.
All right, excellent, excellent. And if you have background noise, if you can mute out, that'd be great. All right, we're gonna. Yes, please. All right, we're gonna move on. That's the mission. All right, so then we're gonna move on to our vision. Now, the vision to me is, if you're a visual person, I want you to think about what satisfaction looks like for you. For some, it is, oh, Sam got his mission statement really quickly. Create custom tailored designs for clients within challenging spaces, mainly in residential. Encouraging a dynamic collaboration with the customer through 3D walkthroughs that help us build a future space together, anywhere, anytime. Okay, that's more of a elevator pitch, which I love. What I would do, Sam, is to simplify and just use the formula, right? So you're creating custom tailored designs for clients. So you create designs for clients within challenging spaces using 3D technology, perhaps.
Yeah.
So you create custom tailored designs for clients in challenging spaces using 3D technology, perhaps.
Right. Okay.
Does that sound a little more condensed?
Yeah, definitely. I also tend to sometimes over describe. So
Well, you're creative, and that's expected. So I love working with creatives, and part of my gifting is to simplify. So creating custom tailored designs for clients with challenging spaces using 3D technology.
Yeah, that sums it up very well.
That's exactly what I need. So we'll have to talk. All right, so let's get back to the vision. So this is very simple.
All right, I'll send you my credentials later.
Absolutely, we'll be sharing. All right, so what does satisfaction look like? This is very simple. Imagine you just finished a long day at the offices, in quotes, because some of us have office spaces, some of us are working at the kitchen table right now. But after that long day, you settle into your favorite chair with your beverage of choice and you feel satisfied. So what does satisfaction look like? What does it smell like? Who did you work with today? Take a minute and kind of think about that. Try to experience it sensually. Not sensually like sexy, but sensual meaning involving the senses. What does it feel like to have been satisfied with your day? Who did you work with and how did you make them feel? Really quickly on your PDF or on your notes, just kind of jot down some ideas on that. For me, satisfaction feels like clarity. I feel satisfied when I'm a very task-oriented person, so having completed my to-do list satisfies me. And giving my clients that same feeling satisfies me. So when I sit down at the end of the day, it feels like peace. It smells like warm vanilla sugar. If anybody is a Bath and Body Works person, that's my candle of choice, right? And what does that beverage smell like? Right now, I'm doing red wine because the season's changing. But one of the things that I love about cold weather is drinking warm brown beverages, like hot toddies, things of that nature, and the smell of the cinnamon that we bake in there. What does that look like for you? Oh, Miriam, how beautiful. Breathtaking. Yes. A breathtaking view, a gentle windy day, green. Oh, you're so creative. I love it. A great sea of airplanes on a calm day without conflict, without negative voices, without negative vowels. Interesting. And as I'm reading that, I'm getting a little tingly, and your client should too. That's why you need to be clear about the vision, because when you share that, the ideal client will have that sensual experience with you. And that's why it's important to be clear. Self-assessment and self-awareness, such a powerful tool. So even if you can't quite get there right now, I want you to take some time later to revisit this. All right, well, for the sake of time, we're gonna keep going. All righty, so the next thing we're going to look at, Sam, it's like succeeding in a video game. Wow, I love that. Especially with the 3D technology, you can really engage your clients in that process. Really good. And we'll have to download this chat for you all, because it looks like some of you are taking notes in the chat, which I get. So we'll make sure that Candy downloads the chat for us.
I can certainly make that available. And Sam, that makes me feel like that statement that you just posted makes me feel very energetic and like excitement. And I don't know, it just gives me this energy, I guess, of some sort.
Yeah.
Everyone
But
wants
it's just
to
a little
win.
side note, and I'll be short. This idea, exactly, absolutely, and it comes from a video game actually called The Sims, which is like a simulation game where you create families and houses. And exactly, and I was a teenager back then, and I was doing all-nighters with that stupid game. And as a teenager, I thought, well, it's awesome, but if only these characters were actually real, that would be like next level. And I am doing what I do. So yeah, that's why I wrote that. And that to me is really satisfaction, pretty much.
Awesome. I think we can all relate to that.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you
yeah,
for
and that's
sharing.
also what I want the customer also to feel, that he's basically like lured into this joy and, you know, this fun of solving problems, because I really do it with him. He's not like just someone who listens, he's really actively involved into the process. I think that's very important in design development.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that makes it more enjoyable for everybody.
Mm.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
move on. Let's look at some core values. Core values. So I've listed here my 5 core values. I want you to try to identify 5 as well. I've given you a little bit of a graphic here with some words that you can use to prompt, but try to just think of general principles that are foundational for you in your work and in your personal life. What matters most to you? What matters most to your client? And what of those things are, what of those things do you share, right? Because you want to try to connect with your target audience. So like Sam just mentioned, that sense of completion is important to him as well as to his audience, and also their opportunity to engage, right? To engage collectively. So maybe community may be one of his value words. But really quickly on your worksheet, just try to write down at least 5 value words. And these, again, will shift. They will change as you get to know yourself better, as your business evolves. But it's important because it helps you to find your no. If someone creates an opportunity that's contrary to your value system, it should be an easy no, right? Or we hope. You know, now the ethical lines are so gray, and that's something that bothers me because, as you can see, honor, justice, truth, personal responsibility are all important parts of my value system. So I'm struggling right now as an American citizen watching how our government, for example, is responding to the COVID pandemic. These things are challenging, but it's also helping me to stand firm in my truth. So I'm curious to know what some of your core values are. Feel free to share in the chat. A couple of new people have joined us, so if you want to also share with us in the chat where you're from and maybe a little bit about your business, that'd be great too. Welcome, Risa. Awesome, Candy. Community, yeah, integrity. That's something we share. Honesty, collaboration. Excellent. And that's all in keeping with your mission statement as well. You should see some recurring trends here. I love watching this. Risa, were you able to download the PDF that we're using to take notes?
I'm trying to find it.
Okay, I'm gonna post it for you again.
Okay, thank you.
There you go, no problem. Okay, anyone else want to share their core values? Yes, sustainability, flexible design, adapted flexible design for specific personal need, honesty. So what I'm seeing is sustainability, adaptive flexibility, honesty. Try to just use the words sustainability, flexibility, honesty. Got it? Thanks, Sam. I know you're creative. We're just simplifying for the purpose, because when we get into the weeds, which is next, these things will keep you not to be confused, not to be swayed, not to be moved by what clients are demanding, not to be moved by what the government is doing, not to be swayed by policy changes and positions. So that's why I'm forcing you to simplify. Awesome. Okay. Let me know if I'm going too fast. I'm going to move on because I want to make sure we get to the main things, even though I consider this to be the main thing. I know that you guys expressed to me what you're here for. I want to make sure we get to that. Okay, so the reason why we started there, again, for those of you who joined late, is that I feel that a big part of sustainability is having an internal leading, right? You want to be led by the internal. Now we're going to look a little bit at the external things, right? Once you have done a self-assessment, you've kind of established what your mission, vision, and values are for your business. The reason why you need to know that is because once you choose a business entity and you file for incorporation, they will ask you to include your corporate purpose. And that value statement, that mission statement, is going to be a part of what you include in the organizing document to start your business. So in order to start a business in the United States, again, you have to remember that each state has its own separate laws Okay, so I'm just gonna take a quick minute and share something with you related to legal or the law here in the United States. It's just a really kind of cheesy diagram that I created when I was teaching undergraduate students. Looks like it's not coming up.
If you're up on a different tab or a different page, you'll have to share that on your screen.
Okay, got it. Okay, can you see that?
No, we're still on your presentation.
All right, hold on.
I find sometimes it's easiest if I just stop my screen share and then do it again with the screen that you want to share.
Thanks.
I'm not an expert at it either. Mary, the PDF is just 2 comments up in the conversation. It's called Gilmore Presentation Handout.
All right, is that better?
Yep, there we go.
Okay, so this little house is just a really quick overview of what the American government looks like. I'll share the PDF with you in the chat as well. And so just really quickly, this is our foundation here. I hope you can see that. All of the things that we just discussed, our values, our philosophies, our ideologies, make up our foundation, which is why I shared that with you first. And so we start there, and our founding fathers started there also, and they built that on top of that foundation. This is just our government basics, okay? We have 3 branches. Excuse me just a second. Okay, so we have 3 branches: the legislative branch, which creates the law. So that's our Congress, the House of Representatives at the national level, the state assembly, or perhaps your county boards, right? Or your city boards. So we have 3 branches and 3 levels: the federal, the state, and the local. The legislative branch exists at every level to make the laws. Then we have the executive, which is the president at the federal level, the government at the state level, or the mayor or county executive locally. Their job is to interpret and to enforce the laws. And then the third group is the judiciary, where if there's any lack of clarity about what the legislative branch has created, then the judicial branch is there to clear it up, supposedly, right? The reason why I'm sharing this is because I think it's important to know that in the United States, if you're not from the US, we have what's called dual sovereignty. And so the federal government has its rules, regulations, and responsibilities, but each state also has the opportunity to create its own rules and regulations. And so there's sometimes a conflict with that. And that's why I'm sharing with you today mostly just federal law, but you have to be clear that the state of incorporation is the one that will rule most of what you're going to be obligated under. So this is why for SAM, for example, yes, there are international rules that relate to contract and intellectual property, for example. But when you're working with American business owners, you're going to need to know their state of incorporation in order to know what the requirements are. Does that make sense? Do I have questions about that? There's a lot more here, and I'm not going to talk about what's irrelevant, but I'm also going to share the PDF with you so that you can explore it a little bit later. What's happening here in the upper right corner related to civil rights and civil liberties, I'm just saying that those things are the things that protect us from others who may want to infringe upon our rights. But what you're going to be most concerned about is what's right here in the middle of the house, okay? You need to be sure that you know your client's state of incorporation so that you understand what rules and regulations are going to apply at the state and local level. All clear?
It's super nice to see it laid out like that.
I added the colors and things to make it seem fun because it really is very convoluted, but this is probably as clear as it gets. These things will shift, but for the most part, you always have these branches and these levels. Okay, excellent. People are following me. So I'm going to get out of this and go back. Thanks for the tip on just stopping the share because we're going to keep doing that. That makes it easy.
I think there's a better way to do it, but I don't know. That's how I do it.
Tricks of the trade.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's get back here. So now we're going to choose an entity, and you need to know what state you're going to be in order to establish this entity once you decide which one is going to work for you, okay? Okay, so choosing an entity, here's what you have to think about. Liability. Sam, this is something that you mentioned, right? When you're establishing a contract, or if you're establishing what the scope of your work relationship is going to be with a client, there's always this fear, right? What are some of the fears and concerns that you have? If you could just share with me in the chat some of the fears and concerns that you have when you're working with a new client or starting a new project.
Yeah, I can also say it out loud like this.
Sure.
So basically, liability and responsibility are very big things in design, and more specifically in architecture, of course, and that can be also quite complex in the US, given the regulations that there are there and that are also usually different per state. Now, in my case specifically, as I was already talking about design, what I do mainly is really conceptual design. So that being said, the liability or responsibility will still remain for the local contractor, who is, of course, following the regulations, you know, line by line. So what I do is mainly create a very, very detailed concept or design in that case, where already parts of the pieces are sourced. I'm already going into further details, but regarding liability, the only thing I'm responsible for is individually for each project, like the core, like the main points or the main tasks that I am promising a customer in a given offer at the beginning that he will get, right? So
Okay.
Everything is laid out and discussed very clearly. So the offer that a customer would get serves in a way also as a, so to say, contract. And if he is giving me the green light to that offer, which I actually almost, you know, I treat it almost like a contract, then this, like the listed tasks, this is what I'm going to be responsible for. So he's paying for me to create, I don't know, floor plans, renderings, and whatnot. And then this is what I'm going to be responsible for. So it's pretty much detailed from the beginning on. And this gives me and the customer a certain, at least certain level of you know, knowing and security, basically, on what is going to happen afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
but,
here,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Sam. I just want to follow, I want to back that up with something really quickly that I wanted to maybe talk about a little bit before we started, but this is related to public policy, right? And this is similar to what I just showed you in the house diagram. A part of what's in the foundation, I know for me and for the United States and for most states in the Union, right, is this idea of a social contract. In the foundation of our house, we had philosophers like Hobbes and Locke and Montesquieu and Aristotle and Plato. And what we had come with from what we've learned from all of these philosophers, we established the idea of a social contract. And when you give your word to a client that you're going to do something, you're expected, to complete the task. They're
Right.
paying you for services, and they expect a certain outcome. In our world, this is expected. It's called a social contract. You do what you say you're going to do. So I wanted to clear that up for you, that yes, a contract exists every single time you create an obligation to a client, and you have a bargain for exchange. We'll get back to that a little bit later when we talk about contracts, but I want to make sure you're clear that the contract is not a written document. It is an idea, and it's a commitment.
Okay.
Okay, and you have to be clear about that and understand that the liability flows from that.
What do you mean by liability flows from that?
So when we talk about liability, we're talking about risk. So you are obligated to do what you say you're going to do, and if not, you can be sued. You are liable for completing, for performing under the contract. That's what I mean by liability. If you don't perform, if you receive payment and you don't perform, you are liable. If you do a job and it's unsafe, you could be liable, right? So liability is about your risk. Okay, so regardless of whether or not you have a contract, you have to think about liability. When you're choosing an entity, it's important because certain types of business, and I'm talking to everyone now, certain types of business entities will expose you to greater levels of liability. So LaShonda, I believe, mentioned that she's already done her LLC, right? So what's an LLC? You can see at the bottom, I'm talking about 3 main types of entities here. I'll start with an LLC or an LLP because we have an example of someone who's already filed that. So a limited liability corporation is not actually a corporation at all. It is a business entity that exists when a person is establishing themselves, putting themselves out there for work and wants to limit their exposure to liability by creating almost a shelter, all right? So the LLC shelters you from liability, so that if you're sued, it is more difficult for your client to seize your personal assets in order to meet the obligation, right? So as you can see, that the first entity that we have listed here is the sole proprietor. Anytime you put yourself out there, you are establishing a sole proprietorship. You're saying, I am presenting myself to the world as a business entity. So for example, my law practice is a sole proprietorship. It is the law office of Kristyan Rose Gilmore, and I'm putting myself out there just on my name alone. And that exposes me to a certain level of liability, such that if a client sues me, they are suing me personally. Now, there are insurances that I can get to cover that, and I have malpractice insurance to cover it. But we acquire insurances to cover our liability, right? And so in an LLC, you start with a covering, the limited liability corporation, whereas in a sole proprietorship, you don't have that covering. And so that's the big difference why some people choose to form an LLC or to incorporate as opposed to just operating as their own entity, right? Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Everyone else, just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you're following.
What is the difference between, what is the difference between liability and responsibility?
Oh, good question. Okay, so responsibility is a value statement, right? Your liability is a term of art. It's a legal term of art, which means that when you are liable for something, you are responsible for the damages, if you will. Damages are a term of art as well that mean money or property or something that your client will lose, something that you and your client will lose if you are, if you do the wrong thing, damages, money damages, right? So you're liable for damages if you're irresponsible. Does that make sense?
Right, so I get legally punished for something I was initially responsible for, but I haven't done it correctly. That means I'm liable for it. It's that I am responsible for it legally.
I want to try and encourage you and all of us, try not to, these things, it takes a long time to really understand all this. I'm trying to give it to you in a really general sense. I'm not taking you to law school, right? But remember I said, remember what I said about the social contract. When you put yourself out as providing services, you are telling the client that you are going to do these things in exchange for the money that they're going to give you. Anytime that you do that, you create a liability to perform under the terms of the contract. In addition, there are certain liabilities that come through your profession, right? So there are entities that regulate your profession. That creates liability as well. right? Because you have an obligation to follow the rules. So it's your responsibility to do the right thing. It's your responsibility to perform correctly. All of these things create liability for you if you don't, right? So try to simplify that. So your contract, your contract and your insurances will help you to shield yourself from liability.
Okay. Yeah,
you're also liable for taxes, right? So for example, one of the things you have to consider when you're choosing an entity is how is that going to affect your tax status? So all of us live in different places, we're in different states. So you have to think about at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level, what is the extent of your tax liability? So considering these three entities here, for example, the LLC and the sole proprietorship are entities where your tax liability is tied to your personal income. So you can file your business taxes along with your personal taxes, whereas corporations must file separate corporate taxes. This is why some people choose not to incorporate, but to only do an LLC or to operate as a sole proprietorship. When you form a corporation, you have to file separate taxes. And for small business owners, sometimes that's just a heavy lift. So it's something you have to consider when you're choosing an entity.
Do you recommend actually consulting with a tax professional when it comes to trying to decide whether or not you should register as a sole proprietorship, an LLC, or an S Corp?
That's a great question. I think that most attorneys have basic knowledge to be able to help you choose the right entity and to help you understand what your tax obligations are. Where I think it's important to have an accountant is for keeping your records and actually filing the taxes. I do not suggest that people file their own business taxes. I think everyone needs an accountant. And so, for example, I'm trying to show everyone today how to kind of DIY these things, right? And so I'm going to show you in a minute where you can go, where, for example, where I went to file my incorporation. But once I create the entity, then there are other steps, right? So to file the taxes, I think it's definitely important that you consult with an accountant. And thank you for bringing that up, right? Because I'm not an accountant. But you don't necessarily need that to choose the entity. I would suggest you keep it simple, at least at the start. Good question. Any other questions on the entity choice and the considerations that are around that?
Hi, I'm sorry.
Hi, LaShonda.
I have a question. Something crazy going on with my chat, so that's why I'm not chatting.
No, it's great that you're speaking up. Go ahead.
Okay. So of course, like you mentioned before, I have the LLC. I'm not sure if you can or it's going to be addressed later, but at what point, because I think I've heard if you make a certain amount, whether you should have an LLC or S Corp. And so,
okay, so that is actually more of a question for your accountant, right? Because that is, in my opinion, I don't believe that it's about the amount, right? Okay. It's not about an amount that you're making. Now, when you make a certain amount, you move into a different tax bracket, and so it may make sense for you to incorporate. That's the reason, because of the taxes. But it's not about liability.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Now, real quick, let's look at just a couple more things to consider. Profit share. Profit share really only comes up when you're incorporated. One of the points of incorporation is to be able to issue shares. When you file and when you incorporate as a corporation or an S Corp, you have to state in your incorporating document how many shares you're going to issue and what the value of those shares will be. And that's where it gets complicated. If you're 100% owner, then you probably own all of the shares. Then you begin to sell off those shares, and you have people who are coming in as shareholders, and you have to involve the Securities and Exchange Commission perhaps, because now you're getting into people investing and it gets a lot more complicated. You need to definitely hire a corporate lawyer. for that, but I do S Corps as well. So think about that when you're profit sharing. Who's going to be involved? Is it just you? Are you going to have partners? And how are you going to divide up the equity shares in the business? I know that, Onika, this was one of the things that you mentioned that you had concerns with, so feel free to pop in with your question if I kind of skim across that and don't give you enough detail. The other issue is into dividing up the intellectual property, which we'll talk about later. But when you register and secure your intellectual property, someone has to own that trademark. Someone has to own that patent. And individuals can own patents and trademarks, and corporations can own patents and trademarks. So you need to be clear. Is the founder going to own the trademark, or is the business entity itself going to own the intellectual property? And we'll get back to that. It'll make a little bit more sense when we get into IP specifically, but that's something that you have to consider when you're choosing an entity. Clear as mud? So I will say just generally, again, I'm not giving legal advice, right? But most of us start off as sole proprietors, and many of us choose to do a DBA, which is doing business as, right? Maybe you don't want to use your name. You want to call it LaShonda Waller doing business as lab building compliance, for example, right? And that is just a name. You are still putting yourself out there without a lot of shelter. So a DBA is not going to cover you from liability. It's just a name. Okay.
Quick question with that. Can
Yes.
you is it recommended to do DBA under LLC or?
You can do either. Good question. So corporations can do DBAs, LLCs can do DBAs, and individuals can do DBAs. And I don't, it's really for branding purposes. It doesn't really protect you from anything. So I don't have a recommendation. All right, when you do a DBA, it's for branding mostly. Good question. Any others right now? Excellent. Okay, so let's now keep going. We're going to look at, after we choose an entity, right? You might want to consider whether or not, oops, I'm sorry, I wanted to show you really quickly where you're going to go to do this, okay? So I'm going to show you for the state of Texas because that's where I have an LLC in addition to my law firm, okay? Again, my law practice, I operate as a solo practitioner. However, for my business, my consulting business, I have a LLC, okay? And we file for our incorporation or for an LLC with the Secretary of State. Remember, the states control businesses, all right? And so I had to create an account on the Texas SOS site. But if you Google for any state, corporate filings plus the name of the state is going to come up, okay? So I'm going to screen share again so you can see my profile at the Texas Secretary of State. Okay, so direct access, Texas Secretary of State is currently Kathy Hughes. Remember when I was showing you the house there with our branches of government? The Secretary of State is an agency within the executive branch, and their job is to execute some of the laws of the state of Texas, one of which is to keep corporate records. So when you file with the Secretary of State, you are putting them on notice that you have created a business entity. That's basically it. You're filing to let them know that I am creating an entity, and they are the ones who keep records on behalf of the organization, okay? So here, when you log in, this is an antiquated system, as you can see, but they do the best they can. It's basically just a database, right? And you have access to a database. So let's say here I wanted to, one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to see whether or not the entity already exists, right? And so you're going to do a find because you want to make sure that you don't create something that's already there. In Texas, they charge you $1 just to search. So I had to put my credit card information in, If you don't use it, they won't charge you, but every state is different in terms of how they do this. So it's a huge database.
This would be something we would want to do in the state, on the state website of whatever state we were registering the business in, correct?
Right. So you can see here, this is sos.state.tex.us. Every state is going to have its own website that's still going to have this .us or a .gov. Right. You want to make sure that you are on the official site. So here, as you can see, the name of my LLC is To Be Free. When I put in To Be Free, it gave me anything similar, okay? I'm gonna click on this first one because that's me. It's registered as a domestic LLC, it's in existence. I'm gonna click on that. And all of these things are public record. So when anyone can search for this. This is why you want to be careful when you incorporate, your addresses are going to be there. Everybody can see it. So this is why people choose to get a business address, a PO box or something of that nature, so that you're not putting your personal address on there. The other thing is that when you incorporate, if you're not living in that state, you have to establish what's called a registered agent to accept service on behalf of the organization, right? So when we talked about liability earlier, if you get sued, someone has to receive that lawsuit. And this is why you're required to have an address in the state of incorporation so that your customers, when you do the wrong thing, can sue you, right? So that goes back to the liability conversation. So right now, my registered agent is in Conroe, Texas. All right, because again, I live in New York and I have a person who's accepting service on behalf of the organization in Conroe. You can see I filed my certificate of formation on August 21st, 2009. They have the images available. I'm going to click on it just so you can see what a certificate of formation looks like. And this is the official corporate filing. So when people want proof that my entity exists, this is what I show them. All right, so you can download these. When you download, most of the secretaries of state will charge you something per page, but it's not expensive. So you can see when I filed, my fee was $300. It's going to vary by state. This is sometimes a barrier to entry for people, right? This is why some people choose not to incorporate. You might decide just to operate as a solo because you might consider this cost to be prohibitive. Thank you for that. Candy just posted a link where you can find the Secretary of State websites for various states. That is very useful. Now, why does it matter what state you incorporate in? Earlier, some of you that you were on the call, you may have heard that one of the people in the group she just started a business, and she was asking about incorporating in Delaware. That's one of the states in the United States. That's one of the ones that a lot of people incorporate in because Delaware has laws that make it a little bit easier to do some of the things that you need to do as a business in terms of liability and taxes, right? And so a lot of business entities are incorporated in Delaware in the United States. But I want to add that the law has evolved and a lot of states have established statutes that are very similar to what you're going to see in Delaware. So Texas, for example, has very good tax laws for businesses. And this is why a lot of businesses are choosing to incorporate in Texas now, just an example. But it really doesn't matter where you incorporate as long as you have a registered agent in that state who can accept service on behalf of the organization and that you are clear that you are operating under the laws of that state. Okay, so it doesn't say much. It only tells you the name of the entity, when I was incorporated, and things of that nature, okay? Nothing major. I did not type this up. This was created for me by the website. So it's a form, you fill it in, and it just creates the document. Okay. So again, when I do incorporations for clients, I incorporate clients in Texas because I find that to be a friendly state. Also, it's the state that I'm licensed in. So I can help them to maintain compliance in that state where I can't necessarily in others. Now, I imagine there may be some questions about this because this is one of the big things that comes up when you're talking about remote work. So if anyone has a question about the state of incorporation, how you choose that, feel free to share your questions. Either raise your hand or post it in the chat. Okay. So that was the filing document. That means that my entity exists, right? And that gets us started. Where do we go from there? Now we want to make sure that we are, you might want to consider, and I'm just going to speak really quickly on nonprofit. I think that this may be very useful for LaShonda because it's an educational tool that you've created. And sometimes you might want to consider nonprofit options for that. However, I do want people to know that a lot of the things that we used to have to use nonprofits to do, we can now just, they have what are called B corporations, which are benefit corporations. And the point of that is that you can have a sustainability goal or a social justice goal and still be a for-profit entity. You do not have to file for nonprofit status in order to have sustainable development goals or a social justice mission. That's why we started with your vision, your mission, and your values. You can incorporate that into a for-profit entity. And I want to encourage you to do that because we need to make money. All right. And a nonprofit is a business that's created to provide services on behalf of the government, and they receive a tax break for doing so. So we know that right now our governments are overloaded trying to respond, right, to the COVID-19 crisis and to create opportunities for people and to make sure people are fed and that they have shelter and that they're able to sustain themselves. And so there's a movement on behalf of nonprofits to mobilize funds, okay? And so those nonprofits exist already. You can partner with them. You can create memorandums of understanding and contracts to work with a nonprofit to create certain outcomes for people without having to be a nonprofit yourself. So I want you to be creative about how you partner with nonprofits. And I say this because being a nonprofit adds another level of work for you in terms of compliance. Not only do you have to get incorporated, not only do you have tax liability, because you do have tax liability, you also have to remain compliant with the nonprofit entities. And that can be a little bit of a haul for people. I'm not going to really harbor too much on nonprofit because I'm watching our time. But is anyone even really interested in creating a nonprofit and have any specific questions for that? I was going to show you where we go to file for nonprofit status and things of that nature, but I don't know if it's relevant. So just let me know if it's relevant for you and I'll go there. And if not, then we'll just kind of move on. But I want to be clear, if you're operating a nonprofit, you have to state in your bylaws, right, which is that corporate document that we just created, you have to have a charitable purpose expressed. Otherwise, you won't be able to achieve nonprofit status. And charitable purposes include education, moving things forward with regard to the arts and sciences, research, things of that nature.
This is LaShonda. I'm sorry.
Yes, LaShonda. Sure.
I'm interested, but I know for time's sake, but what may happen, I may ask, to send a link or something to my email later or something like that. So,
I mean, you can connect with me and ask any questions that you need later on. Again, I'm an attorney who works with nonprofits. Most of my clients are activists, artists, creatives, political organizations. And so, there are lots of options for you if you do have a need there. I'm only saying that it adds another layer. And if you're going to be working remotely, if you're nomadic, if you're the kind of person who likes to have things minimalized, having a nonprofit just creates a whole nother level, right? So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless it's absolutely necessary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. For the sake of time, we're going to keep going. All right, now let's talk about contracts. Okay, we'll get back to IP. because I know this is important. All right, so contract basics. We talked about public policy a little bit, this idea of the social contract. Remember that whether or not you have any type of written document in place, anytime you form a contract, you make an offer, someone accepts it, and there is consideration, you are forming a contract. I want to repeat that. Whether or not it's in writing, anytime you offer someone and they accept it and there is consideration, you are creating a contract. So it's pretty clear what an offer is, and it's pretty clear how you accept an offer. Consideration is where people get a little bit tricked up. And so I like to think of this as a bargained for exchange, either of goods, services, information, something. If there is an exchange between the two, and you feel like you're giving up something, and that other person feels like they're giving up something in exchange for what they want from you, it's a contract. Now let that sink in, because I know that when we started, Sam, you were saying contract in air quotes. There's no air quotes, right? When there's an offer that's accepted and there's consideration, there's a contract. Now, okay, I'm seeing a question. I knew there would be. Okay, you got it. Good. Okay, I understand. Sorry, no problem. Oops. Get back to that. All right, so let's talk about the statute of frauds, because this is a big piece of law that exists in most states, right, in the United States, and it creates an obligation that certain contracts must be in writing. Okay, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky for some of you. So we use the acronym MyLegs to remember this. These are the kinds of contracts that must be in writing. A marriage, right? Every marriage must be in writing. This is why you have to go to the clerk's office and get a marriage certificate. It has to be signed by the judge or the pastor that married you. And it's a commitment. It has to be in writing. Any service that you're contracting for that's going to take more than a year to finish must be in writing. Any. Okay? And that's a big one. You may not realize when you start that the project is going to take so long. Go ahead and write it out. Unless it's a short-term contract, you need to write it out. Any contract for the exchange of land must be in writing. Any contract for goods over a certain amount, that's where sales come in. A contract for the sale of goods over a certain amount, and that's going to vary by state, must be in writing. An executor and guarantor, let me explain that. When someone dies and the state must be distributed, that person that distributes the estate is the executor. If you want to establish an executor, it has to be in writing. That's probably not relevant to most of you, just want to make that clear. The other thing is a guarantor. If you're taking out a loan and someone else is going to be responsible for that loan, it must be in writing. So that's MyLegs: marriage, anything over a year, land, executors of estate, loan guarantors, and sales of goods over a certain amount, which will vary by state. Okay. You want to talk to an attorney or Google to find out what that amount is for your state. And it's lower than you think. So this is why using things like eBay, right? For example, they kind of take care of that for you. Sam, you mentioned Upwork. Upwork creates a contract for you, right? Using that service. That's part of why they charge you, because they are basically writing the contract when the client signs and you sign. Okay, that makes sense. So questions about contract. I know we probably have some specific questions, so I want to take a minute for this. I also have, in terms of formation, right? When you're writing a contract, it's actually a lot easier than you think, right? There are certain terms that have to be clear. And it's basically, what are you doing? What are your obligations? What is that person's obligation, right? Time limits, amounts, things of that nature have to be clearly defined, because they make it easier for you to enforce a contract. Just because you have a contract doesn't mean it's enforceable. right? So that's two different things. If you want for the court to be there to protect you in case the other person doesn't perform, if you want the court to enforce that contract, you have to have clearly defined terms. And in order for it to be enforceable, the terms must be clear, and it can't be a contract for something that's illegal, such as human trafficking. You can't do a contract to kill someone, right? Even if it's in writing, if it's illegal, it's not enforceable. I just have to say that. Please don't. So in order for the contract to be enforceable, it must meet certain legal obligations that come from the state level. So that's, again, why you have to be clear what state your client is in, what state you're incorporated in, and the contract has to be compliant with the laws of both states. Sometimes the contract will include a clause that speaks to, if there is a dispute, we will operate under the laws of state A. And that should be, if you have two different states, that's something you want to make sure you include so that you are clear. Sorry, Candy, I burst your bubble. Why? Do you want to share? You have a specific question, or?
No, I was just joking. If I can't contract to kill somebody, or no. Not that I would anyway.
Okay, no, I thought you had a contract that you had already created that you found out was not enforceable. It's really easy to make those modifications of the, just the language. And yeah. I'm happy to help if anyone needs to, has questions about what language to include to avoid any type of problems with that.
Yeah.
With enforceability.
I think just because I've dealt with some bad contracts in the past, I would just caution people to make sure that all elements are covered when you're building out those contracts, so that they are enforceable. Nothing's worse than thinking that you have an enforceable contract and finding out when you need it that you don't.
Right.
So
right.
Getting some legal expertise to put eyes on that is not a bad idea.
And it's so easy right now. They have, forms and things. So you find a form, you modify your form, and then maybe you just pay a freelance attorney for an hour to review what you've already done, right? So you've done the heavy lifting, and then you go and find someone just to do a quick review of what you've done and to make some tweaks. I actually right now during COVID-19 have been offering to friends and family that I will review a contract of no more than 3 pages for free. I'll make that offer just to people who are present, right, on this call. So freebie for me, right? If you reach out to me, by email, I'm willing to review a contract of no more than 3 pages if you want to draft it, okay? No problem. Okay, so you can find forms very easily online. You find one. I'm not going to give you the form because then that's me taking ownership of it. I can't, right? But if you find a form and you want to edit or modify and send it to me just to make sure there's no red flags, I'm happy to take a look, okay? Be leery, be careful with these organizations like LegalZoom and things of that nature that will charge you to do stuff like this. A lot of these things you can do on your own, and you really need a person, a body that you can communicate with. And now you can find people freelancing and doing these things pretty easily. You shouldn't need to go to a LegalZoom. What LegalZoom is doing, and I'm just going to share, I don't have a problem with LegalZoom. I have clients who have come to me after having incorporated with LegalZoom. But what they want to do is to establish an obligation for you to come back to them every year. So they want to be your registered agent, and that's how they make their money. And so that's actually a great service that they provide. There are other companies that do that, like USA Corp, for example, who can also serve as a registered agent. So there are companies that you can hire to be your registered agent, even if you are not present. And remember, I mentioned the registered agent earlier as being the entity that receives service on behalf of the corporation if you are sued, okay? All righty, so again, be careful with your contracts. It's a bargain for exchange. You want to be clear about what is expected of you and what the client's expectations are. I suggest that you get whatever money you can up front, because people don't have money right now. And you can give discounts, but don't necessarily always expect to get paid. And it's sad, right? So what happens if you don't get paid? Let me just address this quickly, because I know it comes up a lot. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to sue someone for payment. And this, it's just a pain. By the time you sue them, you probably will have spent more than the price of the contract for a freelancer, right? For those of us who are doing service contracts for small amounts. It can cost you thousands of dollars to sue someone for payment. So this is why you want to be clear about terms. You want to attract clients who have integrity. That's why we started with values. You need to be leading from the internal so that you're attracting those external clients and entities that are not going to create these problems for you. Because I'm going to be honest, it's almost impossible to sue for monetary damages when someone doesn't pay. It's very expensive. So try and get your money up front. Question, LaShonda?
Yes.
Sure.
That's what happens when you're in a small group, because you can see the
No, I'm glad that we have this, because people are learning from your questions. How can I help?
So when you mentioned about getting paid for your services, do you recommend, because this is what I've been thinking, like I said, I started it in March, so I'm working on something right now, so we haven't finalized details with one client. But do you recommend maybe saying 50% up front and then the rest in installments, or at the end of the completed work? I mean.
Okay, so my recommendation is that you get 100% up front.
Okay. Of
course, right? I mean, if I'm your lawyer, that's what I'm going to suggest. But then your client's attorney is going to say, never give 100% up front. So how do we meet? That's why when we're talking about that bargain for exchange, it's a meeting of the minds, right? And it's a place of connection. It's a place of community. And you have to think about what's best for you and what's best for the client and try to find a middle ground. So what I usually do, attorneys do this, we just get everything up front. We are known for that, and we've established that. And I think that what you're doing is very important. So maybe you should establish that. But it depends on what the client can do. I always ask for 100 up front. And if they can't do it, then we talk about it, right? And if it's a contract that I really want, or a client that I value, or maybe I value their work so much that I'm willing to possibly take the loss. But I assume that I won't get anything else after the first payment, just the way I handle my business. So I may charge more if I know that I'm only going to get that first installment, because people just don't pay. They don't.
That's sad.
Now, if you're doing something where, for example, with Sam, let's say he has to go there, he's an interior designer, and he has to actually go to their home and do something, they're more likely to pay because he's not coming, right? If they don't pay. But if it's a service thing and you give them all the work, a lot of times they won't pay. So you have to think about, how do you maybe dripping the services to align with that payment plan. Mm-hmm. And this is all going to be in what's called a statement of work. In your statement of work, which is a part of your contract, you're going to spell out what you're going to do and what the timeline is. And you're also going to spell out what the payment terms are. But I would suggest you get as close to 100% upfront. And I have an example. This is why I do this. I hired a marketing girl. Oh my gosh, she took my money. And I learned. I made the mistake of paying her upfront to do social media content for me over a time. She worked for the first month and then disappeared. So we have to learn the hard way sometimes. So the client is afraid of that, just like you are. This is, again, why it's important to attract people who align with your value set.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I find this very interesting. I think this is something we are all dealing with these days, and probably even more now in the upcoming future. Like with my customer, like what I like to check is always to verify what the level of dedication really is. So I felt like doing a deposit payment was in most cases the best way if it wasn't for the escrow payment from Upwork. And also like looking at the track record, but you know, like of the person itself, like does this person have a digital, like an online presence, like does it seem trustworthy or not? Like I felt like these were already like two good solid indicators, so track record and deposit, because if someone is willing to pay a certain amount, it shows, okay, this person is really in it, rather than paying nothing. But my question to you is, since that you have probably dealt with more customers that I have in your career, do you have, this is less as a lawyer, but more like as like interpersonal, like as just as a human, like do you have any other red flags maybe on how to spot a, I don't know, a non-paying customer maybe?
I mean, if you've already established the contract and they're not paying, I mean, of course you want to send strongly written communications. We call it demand letters, right? So you make a clear demand that we have a contract. This was the term. This is how much time I'm going to give you before I have to pursue it further. It's almost a threat that you're going to sue. Again, suing is very expensive, but the client doesn't know that, right? So you make them think you're going to sue them. And you keep doing that, and you give them timelines, and you know, as much as possible to try and put the fear of God in them, for lack of a better word. But we call this due diligence. You want to do your due diligence, right? So when you talk about looking at their social media profiles, maybe getting a testimonial, I'll ask a vendor to give me a reference. I want to talk to a former client. If it's a big job, I want to talk to a former client. Those kinds of things are expected, and if they give you pushback from that, I consider that a red flag. If you ask them for a reference to a client that they've worked with before and they don't respond well, that's a red flag, right? Also checking, we have here in the US called the Better Business Bureau. We report businesses that don't operate well, so they get a grade from A to F. You want to maybe look at the Better Business Bureau site. You can check their credit. There are entities that will allow you to check client credit. It can be a soft inquiry. It doesn't have to affect their credit score, for example, but you can look at that. Dun and Bradstreet keeps corporate credit reports. Okay, you can check. And if you're working, for example, with a nonprofit, Guidepost will keep their tax documents and make them public for you. But when you're working with individual clients like you do often, Sam, it's very difficult. But you can also kind of tell from, you know, like you said, it's mostly a value judgment.
Yeah, it is.
We're running out of time. I want to talk about IP and then answer a couple questions before we go, okay?
Sure.
And again, you guys will have my contact info. I'm happy to help with any follow-up. All right, so IP, really quickly, there's 3 different main things you want to keep in mind. Copyrights are for ideas. Patents are for inventions. Trademarks are for your brand. All right, so ideas being creative works. Creative works. You copyright your creative works. All right, so these are completed creative works such as scripts, photographs, written documents, songs, software, any completed creative works you would copyright. All right, inventions must be tangible items, right? Actual things, goods. You can also patent a business method if it's accompanied by software. So LaShonda, it sounds to me like this may be relevant to you, right? Because you are giving people perhaps a method for how they can create a compliant and sustainable lab. If you come up with a method that is innovative, or you improve upon someone else's method, and you do that in a way that incorporates a software package, then you can patent that business method. All right, okay. So this is why people create apps to go along with the services that they provide, because that could make it patentable. You can also copyright the software, and then you can file for trademark registration for the brand logo itself. So then you're covering all your bases.
Okay.
So remember, you're going to copyright completed works, you're going to patent your inventions, you're going to trademark your brand. Now, where do we go to do this? I'm going to show you quickly the can't see that. Okay. The website for the Patent and Trademark Office is the uspto.gov. That's uspto.gov. Okay, so when I go to their website here, they have revamped, which it looks really great. Notice uspto.gov, they have it divided up in a way that's really easy for you. They try to make it user-friendly. In the United States, we want people to be able to do most of these things on their own. You shouldn't have to hire an attorney. I of course, recommend you do so that it's done correctly, right? But you don't have to. They give you all the information you need here, okay? So the first thing you want to do, I'm just going to give you an example with trademark, okay? You want to first search, just like we searched for that business entity to see whether or not it already exists. You want to search to make sure that your trademark has not already been filed, okay? If someone else has already filed it, it's been registered, and if you use it, you're infringing upon that person's trademark. So you go in the trademark electronic search. And again, this is a huge database, just like it was when I was in the Secretary of State. We're going to do a basic word search, okay? Close these other tabs since we don't need them. All right, so here, oh, look, a couple came up when I clicked on, because these are clients, all right? So for example, I'm going to use this one because I filed their trademark for them. Harlem Haberdashery is a fashion client of mine. They operate a bespoke custom clothing entity, all right? So if you click on it, it will show you, this is their trademark registration information. This is the mark. It gives you an example of the mark. We had to choose which categories they wanted to exist in. So this is a mark that we created specifically for their liquor brand, okay? They were a fashion company that wanted to create liquors, right? So we had to choose all of these categories: bourbon, whiskey, vodka, etc. This is where it gets difficult, because you need to know the codes to be able to put this in. It lists them all here, and in here is down under the design, we have to actually tell them what it is descriptively. It's a circle, 3 or more circles, partially shaded with banners, with a belt. It's a little small, so you can't, let me see if I can zoom it. That might be too big. That is too big. I wanted you to be able to see their mark, but you can see there's crowns, there's a belt. So I had to come up with a legal description of this. And this is the part that people hire attorneys for, because this is why you sometimes will be denied. If you don't come up with the right description of the mark, then it'll come back to you and ask you questions and questions and questions. So it's easier to get it done right the first time, okay? But this is not something that you can't do on your own. They're not gonna take your money. They want you to get it. It's just they're gonna send you a letter and ask you to clarify over and over. So to streamline, you hire a lawyer. Most of this stuff you can do. It's just to streamline it. You hire someone, okay? So the mark is for the brand, all right? So you have to, when you file, you have to give them an example here. We call this a specimen. You have to tell them what categories you're registering in, and you have to give them a word description of what the mark looks like. You load that all up into the system, and it takes anywhere from 60 to 90 days in order to get your trademark registration. I don't do patents. You have to have a special type of license to do patents in the United States, but I do copyrights and I do trademarks. you actually can't file your own patent. You have to hire a patent attorney, and they are special lawyers who used to be engineers. So you have to take a, yes.
Sorry, just a quick question on trademarks.
Uh-huh.
Your trademark is protected from the point of application. Is that correct?
Oh, that is such a good question. I'm so glad you asked this. Now,
I've
in the United States, you've been through this before, right? So in the U.S., you actually have it's called a common law. See, the United States is not a civil law country. So we have common law kind of like the UK. So even if it's not in a statute, you still have a certain rights just because you live here, right? So just as for lack of a better word. So under the common law, anytime you put your brand out in the stream of commerce, you are technically protected from infringement, just putting it out there. This is why you'll see people with a brand and they'll have TM up in the corner, right? It's because they're putting the world on notice that because this is in the stream of commerce, I am establishing a common law trademark here. When we go to the USPTO, we are simply putting the world on notice that we have this registration, that we have this trademark. And so from the time when you put it in the stream of commerce, you have a certain level of protection. But to your question, when you file the application, you now have put it, it's almost like made it official. But your protection is established from the time when you put it out there. Now, if someone infringes on your mark and you decide you want to sue them, do you think you'll be able to make a good argument if you never filed the registration for the trademark? Probably not. The court will say, well, you couldn't have been that serious about it if you didn't register the mark, so you're less likely to win, right? How was that person supposed to know that you had already put this out there if you didn't register? So then you have a weaker argument. Although the right exists, it's more difficult to win when you haven't registered. The registration is just to put the world on notice of rights that you technically already have. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, and so once you do the registration and you receive your certificate, now you can use an R instead of a TM because you have a registered trademark. So up in the corner of your brand, you're going to put an R instead of a TM. But I always tell clients, go ahead and put the TM up there just because it makes people less likely to infringe. But you still want to go ahead and file so that you can use an R instead of a TM.
I have a question regarding the borders or the limits of this patents. And like, let's say I patent something, like, are there actually physical or geographical borders or limits to this patent?
Good question. So are we talking about a patent which is for an invention?
Yeah, let's say for a digital invention, for a program, a software, or something like that. Or a method,
okay, so for software, you're going to copyright software. So remember, with the patent, it's for an invention, something like a phone or my water bottle. Okay.
Right.
So when you are, let's say you create an application, like you create your own 3D application for doing interior design. You would copyright that. Now, where does that extend? It's only going to cover you in the United States, technically, right? If you go to the USPTO, you are filing for a trademark registration in the United States. However, treaties protect you internationally. And so it becomes about what country you are in and what are our agreements with that country. So that's where it gets complicated to operate internationally, right? But I mean, right now we're in a good place with branding. I mean, I think for the most part, people are respectful. You can see when someone is using your brand inappropriately, for example, on social media, and you can correct them on your own, and people tend to comply, right? But there is international trademark registration, which I don't do. It is very expensive, and I would not recommend it unless you're going to be making a lot of money. But there is international trademark registration. There is no international copyright law, But there is international patent law.
Okay, so if I only have like a copyright that is within the US, so technically there could be someone in China saying, "Oh, that's a nice program, I'm just going to copy it," and then I would not have protection.
No, I mean you would have. There are, because the treaties, remember. So the treaties are
Right,
what protect.
exactly.
When people say international law, there is no like international law outside of treaties. Treaties are what create the international law, and so it gets complicated, which is what makes it expensive. But there is protection. It's just that you have to, it's going to be expensive for you to do it. But yes, of course, right. But there's also there are safeguards that you can add to the software itself so that it's not copyrightable. But then there's also this open source movement. There are APIs. So, there's a way to do it and make it marketable for yourself so that people don't have to infringe. Like take away the concern by just creating an API or doing it in a way that maybe you can share, because we're all here to learn, right? Collaboration, that was one of your values. So
exactly, absolutely. My last small question regarding this is whether or not you need to be an American citizen to apply for a copyright or a patent.
No.
Okay, so anyone can do it.
I won't generalize it to say anyone can do it, but you don't have to be an American citizen. But it's a little more complicated than that. But this is, this is something that if you have concerns about that, I would say make sure you hire an attorney to secure your IP. Because if you want international protection, there's a certain way you have to do it. You do not have to be an American citizen, but in order to enforce it, right? The American government is concerned with protecting its own citizens. And so enforcement becomes difficult when you're not a citizen.
Okay. All right.
So that's why, and this is another point, and I know we're almost out of time. This is, in the United States, corporations have individual rights, which is actually crazy for a lot of people who don't live here. Corporations are like people. And so when you establish a corporate entity, that corporation is treated as a citizen of the United States. If you incorporate in the US.
Right. But in order to do so, you need to have an American citizenship, right?
To incorporate in the US? No.
Yes. You do not have. You do not need to.
No, you do not have to be an American citizen to incorporate in the United States. No.
Okay, good to know. All right.
That's a good basic question, but I again would suggest you if you're not a citizen and you're going to incorporate here, you need to get a lawyer, because a lot of our rights are attached to the fact that we are citizens. So you just want to, that attorney is representing you. And so the rights attach.
Okay, makes sense.
I'm actually gonna pop in here.
Yes.
Kristyan, is there anything that I feel bad because we have to get stopped.
Don't feel bad. That's actually the end of my presentation. So I think we covered entities, we covered contracts, we covered IP. So
great. I did add Kristyan's information into the chat box. Please feel free to follow up with her if you have other burning questions or need her consulting services or legal services. If there's an interest, and if you're interested in maybe doing another presentation sometime down the road, I may send out a poll on some of the subtopics that seem to be of high interest to see if there's an interest in having one of those subtopics kind of broken down a little bit more.
I love that. Thank you so much for being willing. Anytime you're welcome to have me back. Even if you want to do a little workshop for a small group, happy to do it.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you being here. Just real quickly, I will be uploading the video to the locals YouTube channel. So if you missed something, or if you want to go back, do the exercises again, take some notes, whatever. And I will also attach the links for the PDFs that were posted in the group and shared. So we'll have all that information for you guys to look back on. And Any other questions burning in your mind? We've got like 2 minutes, guys. Okay. Again, thank you so much for presenting today. And thank you everybody for joining us. I appreciate your participation. This has been, I don't like legal stuff, I'll be real honest. So this has been surprisingly an interesting conversation for me. Legalese and all that it can be very, very boring, and you brought it in a way that was very understandable and easy to digest. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Great questions and good luck on everything you're doing. You guys have great ideas, and if I can be of assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll see you one day in Georgia, Candy.
Yay!
I'm coming. I'm coming.
Georgia, not the U.S. Georgia.
No, I got to get out of here ASAP. As soon as flights open up, I'm going somewhere.
Well, good luck. LaShonda, Risa, Sam, thank you guys so much for showing up today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Everybody,
thanks for the invitation.
Safe. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, guys.
Bye.
Goodbye. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.